Daily Words of God. God's attitude toward those who run away during His work. There are people like this everywhere. After they have been certain about God's way, for various reasons, they depart in silence, without a goodbye, to go off and do whatever their hearts desire. For the time being, we will not get into the reasons these people leave. We will first take a look at what God's attitude is toward this kind of person. It is very clear. From the moment these people walk away, in God's eyes, the span of their faith is over. It is not the individual person who ended it, but God. That this person left God means that they have already rejected God, that they do not want Him anymore, and that they no longer accept God's salvation. Since people like this do not want God, can He still want them? Moreover, when such people possess this sort of attitude, this view, and have grown determined to leave God, they have already aggravated God's disposition. This is despite the fact that they may not have flown into a rage and cursed God, despite the fact that they may not have engaged in any vile or excessive behavior, and despite the fact that these people are thinking, if there comes a day when I've had my fill of fun on the outside, or when I still need God for something, I will come back. Or if God calls on me, I will come back. Or they say, when I am hurt on the outside, or when I see that the outside world is too dark and too wicked, and I no longer want to go with the flow, I will come back to God. Even though these people have calculated in their minds when exactly they will come back, and even though they have tried to leave the door open for their return, they do not realize that no matter what they believe or how they plan, this is all just wishful thinking. Their biggest mistake is being unclear about how their desire to leave makes God feel. From the very moment they decided to leave God, He completely abandons them. By then, He has already determined the outcome of such a person in His heart. What outcome is that? It is that this person will be one of the mice, and will therefore perish along with them. Thus, people often see this kind of situation. Someone abandons God, but then does not receive a punishment. God operates according to His own principles. Some things can be seen, while others are only concluded in God's heart. So people cannot see the results. The part which is visible to humans is not necessarily the true side of things, but that other side, the side you do not see, does indeed contain God's true heartfelt thoughts and conclusions. People who run away during God's work are those who abandon the true way. So, how can God give people who run away during His work such serious punishment? Why is He so angry at them? First of all, we know that God's disposition is majesty and wrath. He is not a sheep to be slaughtered by anyone, much less a puppet to be controlled by people however they want. He is also not a bunch of empty air to be bossed around. If you truly believe that God exists, then you should have a God-fearing heart, and you should know that His essence is not one to be angered. This anger may be caused by a word, or perhaps a thought. or perhaps some kind of vile behavior, or perhaps even by mild behavior, behavior that is passable in the eyes and ethics of humans. Or perhaps it is provoked by a doctrine or a theory. However, once you have angered God, your opportunity is lost, and your end days have arrived. This is a terrible thing. If you do not understand that God must not be offended, then maybe you are not afraid of Him, and perhaps you are routinely offending Him. If you do not know how to fear God, then you are unable to fear God, and you will not know how to put yourself on the path of walking in God's way, fearing God and shunning evil. Once you become aware and are conscious that God must not be offended, you will know what it is to fear God and shun evil. Walking in the way of fearing God and shunning evil is not necessarily about how much truth you know, how many trials you have experienced, or how much you have been disciplined. Rather, it depends on the sort of attitude you have toward God in your heart, and what essence you express. People's essences and their subjective attitudes, these are very important, very crucial. As for those who have renounced and left God, their contemptible attitudes toward Him and their hearts that despise the truth have already aggravated His disposition. So, as far as He is concerned, they will never be forgiven. They have known about God's existence, been informed of the news that He has already arrived, and even experienced God's new work. Their departure was not a case of being deluded or muddle-headed, much less were they forced to leave. Rather, they chose consciously and with a clear mind to leave God. Their departure was not a matter of losing their way, nor were they cast off. Therefore, in God's eyes, they are not lambs that strayed from the flock, let alone prodigal sons who lost their way. They departed with impunity, and such a condition, such a situation, aggravates God's disposition. And it is out of this aggravation that He gives them hopeless outcomes. Is this kind of outcome not frightful? Therefore, if people do not know God, they can offend Him. This is no small matter. If people do not take God's attitude seriously, and still believe that He is looking forward to their return because they are some of His lost lambs, and He is still waiting for them to have a change of heart, then they are not far off from their days of punishment. God will not merely refuse to accept them, given that this is their second time aggravating His disposition. The matter is all the more terrible. These people's irreverent attitudes have already violated God's administrative decrees. Will He still accept them? In His heart, God's principles regarding this matter are that someone has attained certainty about which is the true way, yet can still consciously and with a clear mind reject God and depart from God. Then He will block off the road to such a person's salvation. And for this individual, the gate into the kingdom will henceforth be closed. When this person comes knocking once more, God will not open the door. This person will be shut out forever. Perhaps some of you have read the story of Moses in the Bible. After Moses was anointed by God, the 250 leaders expressed their disobedience to Moses because of his actions and for various other reasons. To whom did they refuse to submit? It was not Moses. They refused to submit to God's arrangements. They refused to submit to God's work on this issue. They said the following: "You take too much on you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and Jehovah is among them." Are these words and lines very serious from a human point of view? They are not serious. At least the literal meaning of these words is not serious. In a legal sense, they do not break any laws because, on its very surface, this is not hostile language or vocabulary. Much less does it have any blasphemous connotations. These are just common sentences, nothing more. Why is it then that these words can trigger such rage from God? It is because they were not spoken to people, but to God. The attitude and disposition expressed by them is precisely what aggravates God's disposition. And they offend God's disposition that must not be offended. We all know what those leaders' outcomes were in the end. Regarding people who have abandoned God, what is their viewpoint? What is their attitude? And why do their viewpoint and attitude cause God to deal with them in such a manner? The reason is that though they clearly know He is God, they still choose to betray Him. And this is why they are totally stripped of their chances for salvation. As is written in the Bible, "For if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remains no more sacrifice for sins." Do you now have a clear understanding of this matter?